Welcome to Talking in Common, a podcast of all things lifestyle, family, relationships, well-being, kids and culture. This is not a how-to, but an insight into the lives of ourselves and others and how we all manage to get by. Hosted by myself, Kate Gadinsky, and my co-host, Sophie Panton. Take a listen and let's find out what we all have in common. Are you still here on the recording, Soph?
Hi, my dear. I'm here.
Hi. You're here?
I'm here. I have to let you guys know that this is a great episode. We had a great chat with our guest, Brad Marshall, who we'll talk a little bit more in a second. But as soon as we logged on to the program where we recorded it with him, my computer blacked out and I could not get back onto the chat for like 10, 15 minutes. So I am totally absent like the first 10 or 15 minutes of the chat with him.
So
and then randomly I just come in.
It's going to go from Soph talking in the intro to all of a sudden Soph just disappears and it's like she was never there in the first place.
Yeah, had a lot going on that day. So I'm glad that you guys just kept going on with it because I also had Vala, my little 3-month-old baby here right next to me who I was trying to manage and keep quiet during the interview. And then, of course, you know, it's the day that my computer decides just to
shit itself. Like you needed something else to shit itself in the house.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're here
Enough
together
people shitting
now.
Themselves over here.
I was going to say, what do we have in common? But I think because we're looking at each other, we know now what we've got in common.
Yeah, our Bobs. Well, I like how when we just jumped online then, you said, hello, fellow Bob.
Sorry, if you can hear that squeaky noise, that's me moving my bum, dancing to my Bob on the chair.
Are you on a football or something?
Dancing, showing off my Bob. No, I'm on a stool, babe.
Oh, you're on a stool.
You brought the mum Bob back?
Yes, I had quite a dramatic chop, didn't I?
You did have a dramatic chop.
So long, down, way past my boobs. Didn't intend to go this short, to be fair, but I went to the hairdresser and I was tired and vulnerable and she told me I needed it and I was sold.
Well, I think it looks great. I think you've made the right decision and do you know what? It's hair, it'll grow back.
Yeah. So here we are, both back with a mum bob.
Try to get an intro done before babies wake up, toddlers come flying up the stairs, new dogs start barking.
Yeah. How are you going to get a new dog, seriously? What are you going to do with it if you want to like go away for a night?
I'm a bit mentally unhinged, I think.
Seriously. Every 5 minutes you're like, oh God, Otis this, Otis that, he's so busy, he's messy, he's this, gross, snotty, everything. Why don't you just go and throw a new puppy into the mix?
I'm a bit spontaneous, as you know, and I haven't had any good spontaneity, is that how you say it, for a while. So insert dog and here we are.
That's so funny. That's what we did with your last dog.
Oh my God, you're
Remember,
right.
I think I was with you. Not the day that you actually got him, but we were on our way home, you, me and your husband Mackie, from a weekend away together, pretty hungover, let's be fair. And you were like, I really want to get a dog. I want to get a dog. I want to get a dog. I want to get a dog. And I feel like Mackie was like, fine. Like he was just like, fine. If it'll shut you up, we'll go and get a dog. I don't think you got it that day, but like randomly, like the next day, there you were getting the dog.
Well, this time he was very much on board. And on Friday night, once we made the decision, we hadn't told the kids yet, we were getting her the next morning. I said, now, this is not just me. We're both on board with getting a dog, right? And then we were like, we're both crazy, but like, let's do it. I feel like if we didn't just go and do it, we would have talked ourselves out of it. But she's here and she's beautiful. Anyway, enough about cute dog talk.
Cute. Oh my God. And she's a puppy. Cutest.
We've got a good episode to share today.
We do. It's been a long time, not necessarily a long time coming, but we've been talking about this topic for quite some time. And we've like spoken about it with you guys, our audience over Instagram, and you guys made some really interesting comments and made some comments on a poll that we did. And it basically just proved to us that, you know, everyone's kind of feeling the same about it, which is quite, I feel like everyone feels a bit like they're in uncharted waters with it. No one really knows.
Yeah, it's a bit frightening, isn't it, where we kind of sit with, well, not just social media, but screen time in general. And I think we're talking about something that we speak to Brad, who is our guest in this episode, is kind of when you're talking about screen time, it's not just a tablet or a laptop. It's like everything screen. So TV, consoles, because I feel probably even before this chat, I would often just think the iPad
Yeah. He talked
Yeah.
about it like recreational screen time, which when he talks about that, he means any type of screen.
Yeah.
But then he does also talk a little bit about in comparison to educational screen time, like in school, monitored in school. Well, I say monitored, but even he was saying in schools, like they find it really difficult to monitor what apps or what things the kids are doing on their screen when they're meant to be on an educational app or program. They're like doing whatever they want. Anyway, he goes into a lot of that.
Yeah, we also spoke about how to create healthy screen time. There's some good tips in there for that.
Yeah, yeah.
How more?
It was like,
there you go.
No, go.
I was just going to say how much more addictive screen time can become when it becomes social, which that's obviously for kids, more primary aged kids up.
Yeah.
Not so much the toddler sort of sector.
Yeah.
I guess
focus the chat around young kids, but even like when we said that to him, like, let's focus around young kids, even we realized quite quickly that like the stage that you're in with your young kids, under 10, what's now 8?
8, yeah.
8 and below compared to me, which is like 4 and below. There's like worlds apart.
Oh my God.
Screen
but it happens so quick, like the change.
Yeah.
Because even where Lulu is in comparison to Nina, like it's only a couple of years, but they're even worlds apart with screen time and what they're, well, more so how they're using their screen time.
So he goes into a lot about certain things that those age brackets are into and what he recommends or what's legally recommended for certain ages, all of those sort of things. There was a lot of like real alarming moments, don't you think? That you were like, oh fuck, like how does anyone have a chance in navigating this when it's such a world of unknown? But then also he has a lot of counterbalance in like, here are some ways to identify if your kids have issues with kind of like addiction to screens or obsession
the red
with
flags
screens.
to look out for.
Yeah, red flags to look out for and practical ways of educating yourself and help managing these things. But it was a lot. Like we could have spoken to him for so long.
We continued the conversation offline, and I wish we were still recording because we learned, so much more still. But also, I reckon we probably should say we haven't done this to kind of shame anyone on using screens or having screen time.
Totally.
I mean, as Brad even said, like he's got 2 young kids. They use screens, so it's more about kind of managing your time with screens and how you're using them and creating that healthy balance.
Yeah.
Whereas you and I like to call it rhythm because
there's no perfect parenting, and he does say that as well, that none of it's to shame or anything. All of it's just to bring awareness and educate ourselves on, the best decisions that we can make for our kids. But yeah, he does go into some other like really practical stuff, like recommended ages for certain devices for certain kids, neurological effects, kids and addiction, and how to identify that, the red flags, like change in this space and progression in this space. He talked about it having to be community led, so people that are like minded getting together and making decisions based on their group of kids or their school or their area or whatever it is, which I thought was a really good point. And he was saying that like the generation before us who has like teenage kids, for example, that they were the ones that have really been stuffed over, as in now there is results from certain studies that we can look back on and say, well, we know that this is having certain effects, whereas like the generation above didn't know that yet. They didn't have the studies yet. So they've somewhat been like, oh, well, we're not sure if it's good or bad, but we'll let them do it anyway. So I feel like that was somewhat comforting that at least we're in a stage now where there is awareness
it's progressed
around the
a little
effects
bit
of screen use and screen time, and that there is people now willing and wanting to make change. So
still lots to learn though and lots to navigate and so much that's unknown. So I'm glad we had this chat.
Yeah, me too. Like I feel like we could, even come up with more specific questions based around the chat and have, have it answered more specifically. Because I just kept, I came away like with so many more questions as well.
I know. Well, I think we made Brad 15 minutes late for his next meeting. Sorry, Brad, because we were so engrossed in the conversation.
Yeah.
So enough of us talking about him.
Yeah. So let's hear from Brad. Brad Marshall, also known as the Unplugged Psychologist, has spent over a decade at the cutting edge of healthy screen use. Thank goodness for people like Brad. Brad is an internationally published author, researcher, clinician, and speaker. It's Brad's clinical experience that sets him apart from other speakers in the field of healthy tech use. While others speak about research, he delivers from a place of real-world experience. But he does explain a lot more about who he is and what he does. So let's hear from Brad. So here he is.
Brad, a big warm welcome to Talking in Common. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you both for having me.
I definitely am much more in the whole world of technology with my kids. And there's so much that we really want to pick your brain about today. But before we kind of do that, we'd love to hear a little bit more about you. So anyone that's listening who doesn't know who you are or what you do, can you share that with us?
Sure. It's always a bit awkward talking about yourself, isn't it? So let me give sort of the slightly shorter version. I'm an author of 3 books. So my first book, The Tech Diet for Your Child and Teen, came out in 2019, squarely for parents around technology in this space, and has been published in about a dozen countries around the world. My second book, How to Say No to Your Phone, is more for teens and tweens around them, learning how to say no to their phone and some of the science around that. But it's a more colourful, sort of pretty book, illustrated. I didn't do the illustrations, by the way. And then my latest book, which launches in a few months' time in October, is called Busy Idiots. And that is for parents in the busy workforce and just the busy world that we find ourselves in. So I'm an author. I'm a psychologist by trade. I'm the director of the Screens and Gaming Disorder Clinic in Sydney, which is the oldest screens and gaming disorder clinic in Australia.
Yeah.
I see people from all over the country and all over the world. And last but not least, I decided that I'm a sucker for punishment. So I've been doing a research PhD on clinical treatment trials in this area at Macquarie University, which I'm just about to finish.
Well done.
Yeah, just in my spare time. And then, of course, I'm a dad and a husband, and that's probably the most fun part of my week is taking my kids to soccer and basketball and all of those fantastic activities.
Oh, amazing. So, we'd love to focus this chat around young kids because I guess that's what's most relevant to Soph and I and all of our audience. So, as I mentioned to you before, I've got a 8.5-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a just 1-year-old. And Soph has got a 4.5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old. So we are in kind of different stages in, I guess, the screen time world. But let's sort of start off with, does the screen time limit sort of vary for ages? And what would you sort of suggest for toddlers versus a school age child?
Yeah, so I think that for parents listening at home, the easiest way to frame this is sort of for babies under 2, really we recommend no screen time if possible. Yep. I know that's not always possible. And certainly I want to preface this whole conversation by saying none of us are perfect parents. So when it hits the fan, if you're on a long haul flight or if you are all sick, there are going to be times where screen time creeps in, and that's okay. We're just talking about on average. So for babies under 2, we try to stick to 0 screen time. From 2 to 5, before they hit primary school, we look at sort of an hour or 2, 2 hours being the max. And typically that would be, watching things with their parents or their siblings, and educational things if you can. But, we're all partial to watching a bit of Bluey or something like that to relax ourselves, aren't we? And then you go to primary school and then you go to high school.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets a bit tricky because it's very difficult to give a research-based answer on how much is too much.
Yeah.
And that's really hard to do. Anyone who there's no one-size-fits-all model. But what we look at in primary school is being a little bit more careful about access to devices, certainly outside of the house.
Yeah.
So I don't know about your daughter, Kate, but will she be in year 3 now? Is that right?
So my daughter's in year 3.
Yeah.
And I was actually going to ask you, obviously they use iPads at school.
Yeah.
As does my middle child, and she's in prep. So does that count as the limits of, within your boundary and limit of screen time? Because we don't know as parents, how much they're using it at school.
Yeah.
And obviously they're using it as part of their education. So where do you kind of draw the line with that? Because, with my 8-year-old, for example, she then wants to use her iPad at home. And I'll talk to you more about, I guess, what I would call my boundaries for her with the iPad, and watch TV at home. And it's like, well, how much have you been doing at school?
Yeah.
But then they want to relax at home.
Yeah. So to answer your question, or the first part of your question, when we talk about screen time and I talk about it, I'm talking about recreational screen time.
Okay.
But there's a big but here. Most schools are not as good as you would think, or able as you would think, at limiting the recreational screen time in the classroom. So I'm just going to take some generalization here. For a year 3 class, the teacher usually has pretty good control over what they're doing. Yeah. So that is, if they're supposed to be on mathletics or doing something, they're probably doing that. Okay. Yeah. The problem is that in the last 15 years, we see more and more that as they get older, primary, the class teacher and the school lose control of what's happening there. Now, they will tell us as parents that they have these fandangle software systems that they have been told that limit that and everything. But I can guarantee you, any year 7, year 9, year 10 will tell you half the class is on YouTube or gaming.
Oh, I would believe you saying that.
Right. And so it's this, I think that, again, this is not a criticism of schools. I think that they believe the IT software companies that tell them pay X amount of money and we can monitor all this and limit it. And then when it doesn't work, they kind of go, oh no, what happened here? So it's recreational screen use is what we're talking about. But the problem is that you can't just write off everything that happens in school because we don't really know how much they're using. So let's just pretend in primary school for your daughter, everything she does is above board until year 6. Let's just, we're talking about limiting the amount of recreational screen time outside of the home. Okay. That includes in the car. If the other sibling is at swimming lessons and they're on it for half an hour, it includes at home. That's really what we're talking about there in those limits.
And when we're talking about screen time, we're referring to everything. So it's like TV, phone, tablet, Nintendo games.
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
Yeah,
is like
consoles. Yeah.
Looking at it all as one big thing. Okay, so what do you mean then when you talk about healthy screen use?
Yeah, so there are 5 main areas that I look at in my research, and we've looked at this really heavily in Australian kids as well, kids as young as year 4. And just to give you some broad stroke statistics here for Australia, what we know is that in recent studies we've done at Macquarie University in huge samples of 2,000 kids, they're the largest prevalent samples in Australia. What we know is that 10% of kids between year 4 and year 8 qualify for what we call a smartphone addiction.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's self-report, meaning the kids had to tick those boxes and they knew that we were going to offer their parents help if they ticked those boxes. So I think we can all assume that it's probably more like 15 or 20%. But anyway, 10% of kids in Australia, there are 5 million kids in Australia that go to school. We're talking about 500,000 kids in Australia that have a smartphone addiction. And so these are big numbers. And so as parents are listening to this, if you're listening to red flags that I go through in the Tech Diet for Your Child and Teen, or we talk about here, don't try not to freak out. It's a big number that are in there.
Yeah.
But and by the way, 3% have a gaming disorder as defined by the World Health Organization. So 100,000 Australian kids have a gaming disorder. Now, that's consistent with other Western countries, the US, the UK, all the rest of it. So it's not a big surprise.
Yeah.
So when we talk about red flags, what are parents looking for to keep it healthy? There are red flags when we know it's not healthy. And it's not a set amount of time where you go, okay, well, if Sally's on for an hour, she's fine. If she's on for an hour and a half, it's going to rot her brain. It doesn't really work like that. So if you look at these red flags, there are 5 main areas: emotional development, education, behavior, health, and social development. So we've got these 5 areas that we're looking at. And if we just pick a few out there that are really easy for parents to keep an eye on, the first one is under health is sleep and exercise. So if your daughter, for example, there, Kate, has her iPad and, in year 4 or year 5, you find that she's on there until 11 o'clock because she's on an app and it's impacting her sleep. She's not getting the amount of sleep she needs, which at that age is about 9 to 10 hours at least. Then what's going to happen is it impacts her sleep, and that impacts a whole bunch of other stuff. She goes to school, she's not focused properly, her emotions are all over the place, her behavior goes. It becomes this snowball effect that we call it. So sleep is the most obvious one. For other primary school kids, it also impacts sleep because kids quite often get up early in the morning. You've got the primary school kids that wake up at 5 a.m. and sneak out to grab the iPad or the phone. So that's an impact on sleep. With health, if you have a year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6 kid who says, I don't want to do swimming anymore, I don't want to do nippers, I don't want to do netball, but really they don't want to replace it with anything. They just are doing it so they can stay home on a screen. Again, that's an impact on their exercise and their health. So there are these red flags. We've just gone through health. Social would be another one there. If you organise play dates in primary school, which we all do, they're not in high school where they organise them themselves. Social skills should be done face-to-face, okay, not just online. Now, most kids will say to their parents, that is like, you're a dinosaur, I've seen my friends online. Sure, okay, that's no problem. But at the end of the day, and this is what I go through for parents in Busy Idiots as well, the fact that we're doing so much of our socialisation and work from home and hybrid working, which is okay. The problem here is that when we look into that, even for adults, we do require as humans physical contact and physical proximity that promotes oxytocin, right, which is a feel-good chemical. And so you can't get all of those social needs met via online. So for kids, we want to see them doing face-to-face play dates. If they're saying, no, I don't want to go and do that. No, I don't want to go to dinner with that family. No, I don't want to do that play date at the park, and they just want to stay home, then it's impacting their social development.
So back to that sort of talking about, socializing online. So this is quite a new thing for my nearly 9-year-old. So last year we kind of entered the world of Roblox. I didn't know what Roblox was, apart from the fact that she'd been telling me for months and months and months that all of my friends are on Roblox. So eventually we got Roblox, she started playing it, and then it was, I want to talk to my friends while we play Roblox together. And we've kind of put these, I guess, like the parental controls that doesn't allow her to chat with anyone. So she thinks that I'm like the worst parent in the world for that. But she has Kids Messenger with 2 of her friends, and so they'll call each other on that and they'll play Roblox together.
So the reason for that, and again, you'll get to this in the tech diet for your child and teen, it'll go into a lot more detail, but fundamentally, when you look at gaming, because Roblox is gaming, okay? So Roblox and Minecraft were sold to us 5 or 10 years ago as these educational games. That's BS. They're not, okay? They are very addictive, and they are targeted to younger kids, all right? So fundamentally, one of the key aspects of games is this idea that when you make it social, it's a lot more addictive. So if you look at some of the functional MRI scan studies, don't worry, I'm not going to bore everyone at home here, but functional MRI scan studies are really helpful because they're kind of irrefutable by the gaming industry and the tech industry, right? So we look at these images of the brain, and what we see is that offline gaming, like we all, I'm assuming you guys used to do back in the day. Did you ever play like Atari or Mario Kart or something like that? Any gaming at all? Game Boys? Mario Kart,
Nintendo.
Tetris, Mega Drive.
Sonic.
Sonic, there we go. But they're all offline, okay? There was no Wi-Fi connection. So what we know is that if you do a functional MRI scan of an adult or a child's brain and they're playing an offline game, there is a little bit of dopamine that goes to the brain, dopamine being a feel-good chemical, okay? Now, that was the same way in the 80s and 90s when we all grew up. The problem is when you make a game online and there is a social element where you're playing someone else and you're communicating with them, there is a much bigger dopamine hit.
Yeah.
And that is fundamentally why a lot of this stuff took off and we see these problems now. Now, there's also much more complex persuasive design in these games these days as well, which is behind it. So to answer the question about your daughter here, one of the issues is that the social element of it is what delivers more dopamine. So if she can't chat and she can't video message and she can't do that, there's less dopamine, but she's still playing others. Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's her best friend or someone from, the Philippines. Well, it's still a much bigger dopamine hit.
That's the current conversation in our house this week of can you change my settings so I can chat just with my friends on Roblox? And that's a TBC for us. But I guess, a really important thing that we want to ask you as well is what sort of strategies can parents use to make screen time more educational and beneficial for young children's cognitive and emotional development?
I think that if we just broadly strokes put them in a sort of under 8 category, and again, for some parents, they're going to have a 9 or a 10-year-old that's fairly compliant and follows the rules, and that's okay. For others, you're pushing boundaries at 7. Yeah. I certainly know there are boys that are 6 or 7, especially boys, where they push the boundaries with this stuff. Educational stuff, including mathletics and reading eggs and all this other sort of stuff that you classify as educational, even YouTube to an extent where you're co-piloting it is education. Co-piloting being the operative word. You or another adult has to be sitting there discussing, so what have we seen on the History Channel there and what are they doing? And there has to be a co-piloting element to that. If there's not, then they're basically just doing recreational screens.
Yeah.
And the other issue is that when they get over 8 or that magical number, it's quite normal for kids that age to start to break the rules, right? So you say to them, okay, hey, listen, I've got you YouTube education and YouTube tell me that I can do all these parental software things, which, by the way, we'll get to that later, but most parental software things don't work.
Oh, really?
We'll get to that later. But fundamentally, all of those elements there, the problem is you set it up as, well, while I'm going to cook dinner or while I do, tend to the babies or whatever, I'll give you half an hour of educational screen time and, hey, Brad Marshall, that doesn't count in my 2 hours. As soon as they get over 7 or 8, they're probably flicking screens. By the time they get to 10 or 11, they're definitely flicking screens. And this is the problem that schools have at school as well, is that, you're supposed to be doing a mathletics class. Even take, what's the one we do, NAPLAN? The kids do the NAPLAN test and everything.
Yeah.
So many kids are on the NAPLAN test on an iPad and they don't even care. They just flicked it off and they've got an hour of YouTube.
I didn't ask my daughter if she did it on the iPad or actually.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would have been on her iPad.
Yeah. So kids just are going to get distracted. And so this whole idea of educational stuff, the problem is, there is a lot of evidence that educational screens is fantastic. Problem is, how do you actually get them to stay on the educational stuff? It's like saying cook yourself a healthy meal, but there's ice cream and chips and sugar and chocolate in there, but don't use that stuff. But I'm going to walk out of here. They're probably going to grab that stuff.
Yeah. YouTube I don't allow, and I don't know why. YouTube is the only thing that I say you cannot go on YouTube, and for various reasons. But and that really annoys my 8-year-old as well. And my 6-year-old asked for a little bit because all their friends are allowed to use YouTube, well, most of them. And she's like, but why can I do other things and not YouTube? I'm like, well, I can't control it. Not that I can control Roblox, but you can be looking at anything on YouTube and all sorts of strange things I find pop up.
Yep.
So we allowed her to look up one thing on YouTube a week ago. We said, yes, that's fine. You can go and do that. And then 2 days ago, we're like, what are you doing in there? And the little one comes out, the middle one, and she says, oh, we're on YouTube.
On the iPad, you mean?
They were doing it on the TV.
Yeah.
Because they don't have free reign with their iPads. And I thought, see, I've let you have it once, and now you've pushed that boundary, and the 8-year-old thinks she can just go and use YouTube.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Look, I think, so there's a piece here probably just to establish for everyone. The problem is that most parents these days, when they grew up, certain devices or applications were in silos. If you were gaming, you were just gaming. You were on a Sega Mega Drive or a PlayStation or whatever. If you were on a phone, you were just on a phone. If you were watching TV, you were just watching TV. That doesn't exist anymore. In these ecosystems, the tech world, and they do this obviously for revenue and engagement, the tech world streams it goes across all platforms. So let me give you a few examples. If a child is gaming these days on Roblox, quite often what they want to be is also on an app called Discord. So Discord is a social media app that is typically for gamers. And, it allows you to share video and share messages and all these sorts of things on there as well, right? So then you've got a game and a social media app all kind of intermelded into one. Equally so, if you say to your kids these days, no problem, let's just have Spotify. Well, on Spotify now, you can watch videos. And on top of that, in the last month, they've started coming out with you can watch TikTok on Spotify. And so all of these platforms, they're all cross-collaborating. And that's the problem for parents is when you say, I just want you to have Spotify, that doesn't actually mean what it meant 5 years ago now. And again, it's the platforms, they know what they're doing. They know that this all drives engagement. So I had a full meltdown on Boxing Day last year, the day after Christmas, because I had bought my daughter a Google Home Mini, a voice-activated speaker. No screen on it, just a Google Home Mini. Trying to set that up in her room because she wants to listen to Taylor Swift, obviously. So trying to set that up in her room, going through YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Music, all the different providers. I didn't care how much I paid. I was just looking for – and I literally was having to call my sort of pseudo-celebrity tech expert mate who has 3 daughters – and saying to him, like, what do I do about this? No matter which one I go to, they all have loopholes. They can all either have R-rated material or there's some other way that I can't lock it down. This is insane. And, of course, the point is that most tech applications, whether it's music or gaming or social media or phones, they have parental software, but it's just lip service parental software. And I testified to this just a few weeks ago in the Joint Senate Committee hearings in Australia and Canberra, right? The problem is with the tech companies and the gaming companies, they don't have to give us parental software that actually works. There are a million loopholes around this, and we can go into that more in future if parents want. But it's a really frustrating thing. I mean, you ask yourself the question of why do the best tech companies in the world have the worst parental software, systems. And if you look at any of the tech bosses, so take the CEO of TikTok at the end of last year, was hauled in front of the Senate inquiries in America. And they asked him, do your kids use TikTok? What do you think the answer was?
No.
Oh, no. Why not? How old are your kids? I think he said 6 and 9.
Yeah.
And he said, oh, don't worry. Because then I think he realized, you can kind of see the cogs turning like, oh, Jesus, shouldn't have said that. He said, oh, well, we have this parental platform and you can do this. And any parents go to this and go to that and go to this. But if you ask any tech bosses, their kids don't have devices. You look at the head of Apple, Tim Cook. He's got nieces and nephews. His kids don't have mobile phones. His nieces and nephews don't have mobile phones.
So what is the recommended age for a mobile phone then? I know that would vary depending on everyone's situation, because my daughter has also started saying, can I? And I was like, absolutely not.
So I'll give you the legal recommended age and then I'll give you my recommended age.
Yeah.
The legal recommended age for a phone is sort of nebulous. It's, whatever age. And they will encourage you, through propaganda is what I call it, right? If you want your 9-year-old to be tracked, then you need a phone and they need Life 360 and all this stuff, which is a false sense of security anyway, right? Because kids can just turn it off. But fundamentally, for social media and all the apps that go on a phone, the legal age is 13. Okay? But that is just an arbitrary legal age. There was never any health research that was behind that. That's just some lawmaker in America and then the rest of the countries just followed to say, oh, it's 13, right? Now, if you look at, all the big tech companies and social media companies, they don't enforce that anyway. And that's what all the inquiries are about of late. So legally, the age is 13. But what I told you at the start is that we have a whole bunch of kids in Australia that are addicted. In fact, in our last study, 5% of primary school kids had a smartphone addiction. They're not even supposed to be on it. and they've got 5% with an addiction, right? So that gives you the legal sense of it. My recommendations,
Never.
you know,
Never, ever.
oh, my kids already hate me, and half of the kids in Australia hate me. I'm like the most hated person by teenagers in Australia. Look, I understand that if you have a child that needs a phone, typically we would go for a dumb phone, which is just a stripped down version, like a Nokia 3210 that we used to have, right? And the reason for that is they're not Wi-Fi capable, most of them. Their text messages, their phone calls, their safety, that's it.
God, what
You
a
have to
letdown
accept
that would
that.
be.
Sorry?
I said, what a letdown that would be if you gave that to your 13-year-old for Christmas.
Well, yeah, it would be, right? And so there's a corner of the market there where this fantastic tech expert, Charlie Brown, started these phones called GME phones, G-MEE phones. And they're for this market. If you have a primary school kid, he basically has a stock smartphone that he wiped completely from the factory in China, built his own software, parental software on that actually works, right? So he pitches that for primary school kids and then into early high school, where you can limit things with parental software that works. But fundamentally, there's no reason for them to have a smartphone until at least they're in high school. Yeah. Now, even then, the question of whether they should have social media, my advice would be to delay until 15 or 16. Okay? And the reason for that is just the research. There is a huge amount of research now on the developmental impacts that I mentioned before, and increased rates of depression, anxiety, etc. around social media. So, it's a matter of when they should have a phone. Definitely delay until high school if you can. And then, social media and gaming should be delayed on a phone certainly until 15 or 16 if you can.
So like the programs that Kate was talking about before, the online gaming programs that like Roblox and Minecraft and those sort of games that her daughter wants to socialize over, is there like a conversation that Kate could have with her friends of parents of similar age, or even the school teachers or something? Like, I'm sure you get asked this sort of thing all the time. Obviously, everyone has different rules in their own household. So I also feel like as parents, sometimes we kind of want to hold back a bit, like don't be that parent that like reaches out and says, can everyone like agree on a certain boundary with screens or something? But is there like a recommendation that you have, or like a conversation that people can have without looking like that parent, that's actually just, fair for the kids, but also just safer for them as well?
Yeah. So it needs to be community led. And this was only really possible in the last 6 to 9 months. So I've been speaking on this topic and researching on it for 15 years.
Yeah.
I was the crazy guy for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
I was the guy that was like, 90% of parents at the end of the day were like, well, yeah, I mean, we know it's kind of bad, but like, and most parents would hide their own kids' screen use, right? So you go to a netball game or you go to a basketball game and it's like, does your kid game? Oh, no, I limit them to 20 minutes. But as Kate was saying, right, they're walking off into the room or, and that's not the reality of how much screen time. So the average screen time at the moment in Australia for a primary school kid is about 6 hours a day, recreational screen time.
And is that including TV, tablets, iPads, what else, phones?
We call it recreational screen time because it does not matter what device you're on, and whether you're on YouTube or streaming Netflix or gaming or social media. Like, there's security, cyber safety issues between those, but fundamentally they're all recreational screen time. Yeah. So the average Australian primary school kid is on 6.5 hours now. Older primary school, I should say. Sorry, not the average Australian teenager is 9.5 hours a day now.
Whoa.
Now, here's the concern. I said before there's no perfect number, but there is research around the neurological impacts in America. Anyone is interested in reading this, there's a study by Paulus, Paulus, 2019. You can Google Scholar it. What you'll find is that in this huge cohort, when you went over 7 hours a day of recreational screen use or more, in a 10,000 kid cohort, huge, they could measure the brain cortex thinning prematurely. It's proper neurological impacts on the teenage brain when you go over 7 hours a day. And I've just told you that the average Australian teenager is now way over that.
What's the age that they say your brain's fully developed? It's not till like your early 20s or something, is it? Like as a teenager, your brain's still so much in its development stage, right?
You'll like this one, Sophie. So for girls, it's about 21.
Yeah.
So the areas of the brain that are responsible for impulse control and emotional control, stuff, because we talk about emotion regulation in parenting. It's a big buzzword, right? Like, how do you help your kids regulate? And it kind of frustrates me because parents get this idea then that like their kid is supposed to be able to regulate. Like, no, they are little humans. They can't neurologically do that, right?
Yeah.
So 21 for girls, because those areas of the brain called the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala that are responsible for emotion control, impulse control. 21 for girls on average. For men, we're thinking more like late 20s, maybe even early 30s.
Isn't that wild? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So the influence of technology as teenagers, is going to have a huge impact, much like other things as well. But technology and screens, I guess, are just such an unknown for us and our generation as adults. It's like really difficult to even know that there's such big impacts.
Yeah.
When it's all sort of, we're just trying to keep up with it all. We're trying to keep up with the technology. We're trying to keep up with the studies. We're trying to keep up with understanding the effects on our brain and our socialization.
Right.
And,
I think the generation just before us that have teenagers now, they got screwed. They got absolutely screwed because we've known about the health impacts and the brain impacts for 15 years. But this subject has been smothered over for many different reasons in industries and money and lobbying and all the rest of it. And it's only really come to the fore this year, right? This year is the first year where I'm not walking around my kids' school sort of doing these ones. Like, I hope no one knows who I am or has heard of me, because it's actually accepted now in a community that you should do something about this.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, this idea that our kids need to learn how to manage technology because they're in a technology world, and so they just have to learn how to self-regulate it and monitor themselves, neurologically ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah? I've just said that we don't grow our prefrontal cortex until a certain age. You're going to ask like a 15-year-old or a 13-year-old or an 8-year-old to manage their own screen use? How?
Yeah.
That's like saying, here's the car keys and a 6-pack of beer. Please don't crash the car. Like, it's just silly. So
it's just unsafe.
It is. And coming back to the community question before, because I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, we want to now try to get communities of people within schools or other communities where they all have like-minded ideas about phones, about social media, about gaming and limits.
Yeah.
Now, we should be responsive and accept, as I do, that not everyone in the world has to agree with the science and the research. There is counter science there that I would argue is sponsored by the industry. But anyway, so if 50% of the school basically believe that Sophie and Kate are crazy and, we don't need to be doing this stuff, then that's okay. We can be respectful of that. You can parent however you want to parent, right? Like we're not out to parent the kids of Australia, but if there is 20, 30, 40% of a cohort that actually agrees, that's helpful, because then you, Sophie, can say to your daughter or your son, well, I know that not everyone is online, because I know that Jimmy and Sammy and Mikey don't have that. And so why don't you go and ride your bike with them? How about you call them up? How about you do other things with them? And that's probably, Kate, where you're talking about as well when you start to delve into this world with your daughter. It's you have to try to find some other parents that are going to go, I'm not going to buy you a phone. You've got certain limits at home. Yeah. And if you're saying that you have nothing to do then, well, I can name 5 or 6 kids that you can play with.
So in terms of when you talk about like the recreational, the recommended time for recreational screen use per day. So say if it's like, okay, you're not allowed to do iPad during the school week at all, but you can have a longer period of time on a Sunday. Is that okay, or are they better off to, be allowed a small amount of time, a couple of days a week or each day per week?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Period of time.
I think abstinence during the weekdays and then having bigger amounts on the weekend is okay for younger kids, but only because when you have a younger kids like you've got, you're still able to monitor their tech use by physically taking devices, right? You're still in this blissful stage, and all of us are. The problem is that doesn't work post 8, 9, 10. Because what happens is when they have their own iPad or when there are more devices in the house or their own phone, all of a sudden it becomes this really weird world there where you've got to try to figure out where is each device, and I'm running around trying to pack up for swimming or something, and there's devices floating around. So in that instance, it becomes very difficult to do, and we usually switch more to we prefer smaller amounts during the week if possible.
Yeah.
That's a better plan. So the plan you're talking about where you only do it on the weekends, at some point, year 3, year 4, year 5, that's probably going to reach its limit, and you're going to have to move to more of we're doing an hour a day or something like that.
Okay, so rather than a longer period of time. So I was actually talking to a friend the other day, a school mum friend, and she's got a boy who's in the same year as my eldest daughter. And she was sort of not comparing, but she was talking about her son who's 9 and then her daughter who's 7. And she sort of said, I wonder if, does screen time affect genders differently?
Yeah.
Because she said with her son, like he gets obsessed and he's like addicted to his screens, and it takes him so long to kind of come out of that vortex when she gets him off.
Yeah.
Whereas she said, my daughter, she's so much easier to manage when screen time's done.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Is that like a personality thing? I mean, I suppose it's a bit of who knows, personality, is it gender,
Yeah, so there's multiple factors here, but you raise a really good point. Sometimes it's personality and temperament in that, I've seen families that have, say, 4 boys.
Yeah.
And 3 of them, they parent all 4 boys the same way. 3 of them manage their tech use really well. One of them, it's just diabolical, right? Diabolical meaning they get physically aggressive, they get upset, they get angry when they have to be off, they're breaking the rules, they're really, creating havoc in the family. So some of that is temperament and personality and genetics. But there is also a bit of a gender difference where girls typically are not going to push the boundaries until a little bit later. And even for your daughter, right, 8 going on 9, there's still a level of being able to kind of push back on that, whereas boys are a lot more difficult, especially when it gets to gaming. So girls go down the rabbit hole of social media a little bit worse, as a very stereotypical sort of generalized statement. When they get to 12, 13, 14, they want more of the TikTok, Snapchat.
Freaks me out.
All that stuff, yeah. Well, even younger than 12, right? And so they'll get sucked into that vortex a little bit more. Boys tend to go into the gaming platforms a little bit more. And the problem is that the gaming platforms are actually more addictive, especially online gaming platforms are more addictive than social media. So there's a gender difference there, but there's also just the fact that what boys get attracted to are very good because of all the persuasive design and the online elements are keeping you sucked in to that platform.
I've heard a lot of the boys sneak in her year level Fortnite. I don't know what that is. My daughter doesn't play that.
Okay, have you been living under a rock? You don't know what Fortnite is?
I've heard of it. I would have no idea what it does. And it's not on my daughter's iPad unless she's got it hiding in some, secret place on there.
Yep.
But
what is it?
Okay. Oh no, Sophie. Okay, so Fortnite is
basic humans.
Yeah, Fortnite is a first-person shooter game, which is a fancy term for you run around and you shoot people. And
that's awful.
It's like the Hunger Games. It's like the Hunger Games in a game, right?
Okay.
So it's 100 people dropped into a world, and you can have teams or duos, and you can talk to all your friends. Last man or woman standing wins, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there are all these design elements within that make it addictive. And you're right, that is a game that is targeted to, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And there are other, I don't want to demonize Fortnite, right? I mean, there are many other games just like that. Apex Legends, for example, or PUBG is another game.
That was my fault because I just said Fortnite, but...
Yeah, well, it could be any of them. But so this is the thing is that if you have a cohort within a school or a community group that is playing a certain game, then it becomes very popular. And so then if a parent says, well, you're not going to do that anymore, I'm only going to I'm not going to let you play on the PC or the console anymore, but you've got your phone because I want it for safety. Well, then what you'll find is that they just jump to a different game. So there are many mobile games now. So mobile games including, Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, strategic games with other players that are just as addictive on a tiny little screen. And we need to keep in mind here, the gaming industry in 2020 was worth $168 billion.
Wow.
Just gaming, okay? Now, 2024, it's worth about $350 billion.
Wow.
The industry is massive. And so it is in their best interest to continue engagement. What they get paid for is engagement, which basically means the longer your child or an adult
is on there,
the more money they make.
Yeah. I mean, all apps are designed to keep your use on there, right? Like even as adults now, we know that, like social media apps, everything, they're all designed to keep you on their app, their platform for as long as possible. Websites even, like everything, all the most basic things. Yep. So it's scary to think that ones for kids are designed for that because like you were talking about before, they don't yet have the understanding of, when it's enough to get off it or when it's safe, how long it's safe to be on there. They're just like addicted. What would you define as like a child, like you were talking about 5% of primary school kids are addicted.
Yep.
What would you define as like addicted to screens?
So when we did that study, effectively we used a evidence-based screening tool. It's called the SABAS, the Smartphone Application-Based Addiction Scale. So it's an internationally recognised scale. It's not just some sort of like 10-item questionnaire that we pull out, but it's all been validated. And the same thing for gaming. So all those statistics, they're using scales that have been validated internationally and recognised in research.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I diverted a bit from the gender.
No, that's okay.
Gender-specific question.
Brad, you mentioned a little bit earlier that none of those majority of the parental controls don't really work.
Right.
Kate's like, can we go back to that?
Yeah.
Well, again, I was just saying to my husband 2 days ago, like, we need to go through her iPad again, like we need to check all the settings. And so how do we make it as safe as possible? And obviously, there's always going to be a loophole, but what can we do to enable some safety online?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think I probably didn't touch on before, one of you asked about, is it worth educating then? And the answer is yes. Education is still a part of the solution here. However, think of education, even what I wrote in, how to say no to your phone. Think of education as a bit of it's talking about healthy eating. If you talk to your kids about healthy eating, but they're allowed to pick what they want for dinner, they're probably picking Macca's, pizza, etc. Right? At the end of the day, healthy Harold can tell them what they're supposed to eat, but they're still going to make poor decisions. So we should still educate, absolutely, but we just need to recognise that they may not do that. So parental controls, whether it's on a console or a device, so phone, iPad, whatever it may be, or on a specific app. TikTok has parental controls, Spotify do, gaming applications claim to. The problem is that they are made as a software control, and I'm not going to go too sort of technical here, but I know far more about IT stuff than I ever cared to know when I started psychology 15 years ago. But anyway, software controls are very easy to get around. And so you can get around them multiple different ways. First of all, you can use a VPN that gets around all of them. So are either of you familiar with VPNs? They're pretty basic, right? I mean, you download a VPN. Some are free. They're a bit dodgy if they're free, but teenagers will use them because they want to get around stuff. And it's like deleting the registration plate off your car. If you're going to go speeding and you want to take the rego plates off so you can't get pinned, right? You can do whatever you want to do if you've got no rego plates because the cameras can't catch you. So that's what a VPN does for your devices. It makes you basically invisible. Now, the reason that VPNs are there is because they're supposed to stop, big tech from tracking your data and all the rest of it as well. The flip side to that is if you use a VPN on a phone, for example, it's untraceable. And so all the software parental applications that you've got, most of them don't work then. And that's just by downloading one VPN, right? Now, even if you get a way around that, there are other ways. For example, for Apple screen time, you can change the world clock, and there's just a million different ways that you can do that mean that the software is not workable. Or even just the most basic one, if you've got screen time on a phone, your child can reset the password pretty easily, right?
Yeah.
Just reset user ID. I mean, kids do it all the time. Like they think it's just fun. It's just fun and games, right? And then if you look at the Google, because I want to pick on Apple, if you look at the Google ecosystem, I've got a friend who has 3 girls, and one of his daughters just turned 13, and he said, well, happy birthday to me, because the Google parental ecosystem, Family Link, basically takes you off. They dictate that you are no longer a child at 13. All parental software wiped, and now the parent has to get permission from the 13-year-old.
What?
Yeah, it's bizarre, right?
Wow.
So again, they do these things, all the tech companies, all the gaming companies, they do them as a tokenistic, no, we're being good moral citizens, here is the parental software, but it doesn't work, okay? Any child can find a way around it pretty easily. So
being like quite blunt, how do we stop if our child's opening, say, Safari on the iPad and Googling things, how do we stop like pornography, for example, from popping up? You know, if they write a word that might translate to something, they don't know what they're writing.
Again, the Google software, all the parental software that you can use in all those, and everyone has a different ecosystem. You can apply that, and that's fine. But at a certain age, kids are going to be more independent and more curious, and they're going to turn it off, right? And they'll find a way around it. So I don't want to be doom and gloom for parents with kids under sort of 7 or 8. It's still worth using all that stuff. I would argue that they probably shouldn't have the device by themselves anyway, and you should be co-piloting it. But ultimately there'll be a point where we just have to assume that they're going to get curious and they're going to either turn it off or find a way around it. So when that happens, fundamentally the strategies that I go through in the Tech Diet for Your Child and Teen, what I've found works in the clinic. I've seen over 2,000 families in the clinic in the last 15 years. We work on managing 2 things. The first one is mobile data, and the second is home Wi-Fi. Without those 2 things, those devices are useless. They're useless. They're like a car without petrol, right? You can do brum brum and pretend like you're actually driving, but you're not going anywhere. Yeah. So Wi-Fi is actually what makes all of the social media and the gaming and the streaming work and makes it addictive. Offline stuff, as I already established, is really not that addictive.
Yeah.
And so what we do is we accept that there are flaws in parental software. We still use them, right? I still tell parents, use them, but just assume that at some point, whether it's age 8, age 10, age 12, age 16, at some point they're not going to work or your child will find a way around it. So Wi-Fi and mobile data. So if you have a child that has a mobile phone, again, I strongly recommend that doesn't happen until high school. And even then we should not have smart social media apps.
Yeah.
But let's just put that to the side. For mobile data, I usually recommend something between 5 and 10 gigabytes, depending on how old your child is. So telcos will sell you as a family sharing plan, unlimited data, it's cheaper, go for it. Or there's automatic top-ups so you never get billed. You say to the telcos, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want any of that crap. I want 5 gigabytes for my 14-year-old year 8 girl, so that when she burns through that in TikTok, staying up late because she's taken the phone off the kitchen counter that you thought was secure, that will run out within a night or 2. And then you have 28 days of bliss.
That makes sense. That's like, I feel like that's like something that parents can actually go and action and have some control, because everything else that you're saying it starts to feel a little bit overwhelming. Like, wow, if I'm literally not sitting there watching what they're doing,
right? The
world is beyond me. Like the tech world is beyond me. Like where they go on their device or what they're doing or what they're using feels a little bit scary and overwhelming. But that sort of thing is like something that's very practical and that makes sense. And maybe once they're at an age, like a teenager, they can understand that. Once their data runs out, if they keep choosing to use it on TikTok or whatever, and then they run out and they can't use it to do their homework even or whatever else it is, they have to learn that lesson. It's like quite practical, like other parenting things, other parenting ways.
Look, I recommend my strategies based on the assumption that tech companies and gaming companies are not going to be good ethical citizens.
Yeah.
Because that's what they've shown us so far.
Yeah,
And
we
so
have to be skeptical.
I'm hopeful that through multiple different governments, I mean, the US government, our government are looking at it now, and state governments are looking at it. France, Belgium, I mean, the list goes on, Denmark, they're all banning social media. I'm hopeful that at some point that's going to move the conversation to them actually getting software parental controls that work. That's what we're going to shine the light on. But that may be 3 or 4 or 5 years away. So until then, mobile data being restricted is your next best step. But then you have to also restrict the home Wi-Fi. Because if they've run out of mobile data, but the home Wi-Fi is on 24/7, then that doesn't help either. So the way we do that is we typically use what's called a mesh router system, which is just a type of router system that plugs into your NBN, etc. The one that I recommend is the Deco TP-Link. You can get it at JB Hi-Fi and Officeworks and all the rest of it. It's just got simple hardware, parental software, and basically it allows you to turn their Wi-Fi on and off of their devices. So if they're on their phone and you know they're not supposed to be at 10 o'clock, you can just kick them off the Wi-Fi, or the whole Wi-Fi goes down. So if you have 3 kids, as both of you have, and when they're older, you have different profiles. Child number 1 has an iPad or whatever that he's supposed to use for school, but who knows if he is. Child number 2 has a phone, then he's got a laptop and all this stuff. You have different profiles, and you can just kick them off. Say it's 7 o'clock and it's dinner time. Well, let's be honest, 6 o'clock, right?
5 in my house.
Yeah, 5. That's right. Yeah, me too. So you rather than screaming and having 1 or 2 kids that is just not coming out, you literally just open up the app and you just shut the entire Wi-Fi down for the house. And so
then you get screamed at for doing that anyway.
Maybe you do, but again, it's far less conflict than if you physically have to take a device.
Yeah, that's true.
Especially when you head to the teenage years. So these strategies I'm talking about here, parents might sit there and go, well, for my 6 and 8-year-old, what I'm doing just works just fine. Sure. Yep. What about when they're 14?
Yeah.
What about when they're 16? That's what I plan for. I plan for the teenage kid when it peaks.
Well, that was another question that we wanted to ask you, and this maybe could start more relating to younger kids. But, how do we manage the time that they're on a device for them? Like for me, it's just TV. My kids don't play with my phone or have iPads or anything like that. For me, it's just like been an intuitive thing. Like I want them to play outside, and that's just the way that I've gone thus far. So for me, it's managing TV, but any screen, alike. How are we like setting it up for them in a way that's like, all right, you can have 5 more minutes, or like you say, like physically taking a device off someone, can, I assume, end up being like quite dramatic. Do you have any tips on that sort of thing, like setting them up to know that like, all right, your time's running out, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, again, we prefaced this at the start. I don't know if, Sophie, you were here or attending to the bub, but with the idea that, remember, if everyone's sick in the house, then all bets are off, okay? So, if you get a good old gastro bug that comes through the house, or you're on a long-haul flight, then you see me and my family at the airport, I guarantee you my kids have got iPads, okay?
Yeah.
So let's just remember we're all human, but what we're aiming for on the day-to-day is that if you have younger kids and there is an hour or 2 of TV that you're happy for them to watch, set up that time that's not too close to bedtime. We don't want to be turning it off and then 5 minutes later going to bed. Okay, it's got to be at least half an hour before bedtime. And typically you want to set that up on a weekend, for example, at the end of the day. You don't want to be doing that at 8 a.m. and then they're all amped up for the rest of the day. Use it strategically for a time where you need a bit of downtime or you need to do something else.
Yeah.
At that age, typically, cues around you're gonna watch something from 4 till 5, or you've got till 5:30, and there's the clock, and I'll remind you at 5 minutes to go. That works still at primary school to an extent. Really, when you get upper primary and teenage years, where you've got iPads and bring your own devices and computers and the old iPhone 6S that Dad left in the bottom corner that you didn't even know you still had that works, right? That stuff goes into rooms regardless of whether you want it to or not, and that's where it becomes super difficult to manage. That's where we do more of the Wi-Fi stuff.
Okay, Brad. So to finish this off with some productive tips for parents, what would be your top tips for parents with kids under 10 and managing screens and screen time?
So I would say two things here. One is a super practical one, and the other one is a bit of a big picture one.
Yep.
On the big picture side, what we need to remember is that kids are supposed to, because Sophie mentioned this before and it kind of triggered me. Triggered in a good way, not a bad way, Sophie. She was talking about wanting her kids to be outside and playing and doing things. What's important here is what they're missing if they're on screens too much. If you're at a restaurant and you give your child an iPad because you want to quiet a meal, that's fine. I mean, that makes for a great meal for the parents, right? The flip side to that is what they're not learning is the social skills and the patience and all that stuff that comes with having to sit there and color or go on the playground or something, right? So it's important that we build those skills neurologically. They're missing out on that stuff. If you ask any primary school teacher, what they tell you is that in kindergarten and year one, 15, 20 years ago, you used to get maybe one child that had attention and focus issues, right, or social issues. Now, any kindergarten teacher or prep teacher, they'll tell you there's like 5 every class. And to me, that is not a coincidence, okay? That is a function of kids that have probably not practiced that enough before they hit kindy in year one, okay? Being able to sit on the ground and listen to the teacher for 20 minutes, which is what we'd expect. The second more practical one, if there's only one thing that you do, you have to focus on sleep, especially as they get older.
Yeah.
If screens start to impact sleep, it will go downhill very, very quickly. That can be being on screens late, or because they've convinced you at age 12 that they should have their phone in their room because it's just an alarm and I want to listen to Spotify music and I won't touch it. Again, the reason that I talk about the persuasive design elements in the tech companies is because you have to remember that your child probably will touch that phone.
Yes.
Just like most adults do if they stick it next to their bedside table, right? It is not a fair fight. Your child is the victim. So this is not about what your child wants versus what you want. It's about you saying, I'm setting you up to fail if I let you have that phone in your room, and your sleep will suffer and everything else will go downhill from there as well. So sleep is really the most key one. If they don't get the amount of sleep they need, everything will go downhill pretty quickly.
Wow, so much to take in, Brad. my brain is like in overdrive after our conversation.
I feel like at the end of the day, though, even though technology is like, still, like as I said earlier, a bit of an unknown for us, it still comes down to like the kind of the fundamental basics. You know what I mean? Like use your intuition. Each child's quite different. Sleep, make sure sleep's important, that they play outdoors and they learn those foundations of being a child, socialization, like boundaries, so I feel like if we can just sorry, excuse my baby in the background, she's had enough. If we can just, tap into what's like intuitive, I feel like that sort of takes a little bit of the relief away because it's such an unknown.
Yeah, if it's displacing any of those things, then it's a real red flag, right?
Yeah.
I think Val is telling us we must finish.
Yeah.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Brad.
I've learned so many great tips, and I actually can't wait to listen back to this and take it all in. And I'm sure everyone that does listen to this will get a lot out of it. So we really appreciate you giving us your time. And
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much. And anyone who wants more information on these steps, Tech Diet for your child and teen, or if you are a busy idiot at work and you want more information for yourself, busyidiots.net, and the book launches soon. And thank you, ladies, for having me on.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.